The bullet would travel for nearly 4 seconds before anyone heard the shot. For seconds of silence, while 2.1 miles of mountain air decided whether Chief Petty Officer Yuki Tanaka was everything they said she was or everything they feared. But that moment was still 12 hours away. Right now, pressed against frozen rock while 3 of the deadliest operators in the world bled out around her, she was still just the woman they had laughed at. The one they asked again and again who is she even aiming at. 12 hours earlier, she had stepped off a C-130 at Forward Operating Base Chapman in Khas Province, Afghanistan, and known immediately that she was not welcome. Before we continue, drop a comment and let us know where you are watching from. Maybe you have known someone whose abilities were doubted until the moment they proved everyone wrong. The heat hit her first, then the dust, then the stairs. 6 operators stood near the landing zone, waiting for resupply, and every single one of them tracked her movement across the tarmac with expressions ranging from confusion to contempt. She was used to it by now. 5'4" and 118 pounds, carrying a rifle case that weighed nearly as much as her deployment bag. She did not belong here, and everyone who looked at her knew it. A young Afghan interpreter sat alone near the edge of the landing zone, ignored by everyone. His clothes were threadbare, and he clutched a worn notebook like it was the only thing he owned. Yuki paused and reached into her cargo pocket, pulling out the protein bar she had been saving. She held it out to him without a word. The boy looked up startled, and for a moment he seemed afraid to take it. She nodded once, and he accepted it with both hands, whispering his thanks in Pashto. She understood enough to respond. "You are welcome. Stay safe." It was a small thing, meaningless in the scope of what was coming. But it was who she was even when no one was watching. The Tactical Operations Center was a plywood building with sandbags stacked against the walls and maps covering every surface. Commander Eric Holbrook stood at the center reviewing imagery, while his senior chief Damon Vickers held court with 4 other operators. Vickers was everything Yuki was not. 6'2" and 220 pounds of muscle earned through 12 deployments and more combat than most soldiers saw in 3 careers. His call sign was Hammer, and everyone in naval special warfare knew why. He did not solve problems. He destroyed them. Yuki entered quietly and moved to an empty corner. She had learned years ago that announcing herself only invited confrontation. Better to observe. Better to wait. Better to let them underestimate her until the moment it mattered. Vickers noticed her anyway. His conversation stopped mid-sentence, and his eyes swept over her with the kind of assessment usually reserved for equipment that might malfunction at the worst possible moment. She met his gaze without flinching. That seemed to irritate him more than if she had looked away. Commander Holbrook spoke first. "Chief Tanaka, glad you made it. We were told to expect you." The way he said it carried weight. Told to expect you. Not asked for you. Not requested you. Told. Someone above his pay grade had made this decision, and everyone in the room understood what that meant. Vickers stepped forward. "Commander, with respect, I need to voice my concerns about this assignment. Your concerns are noted, Senior Chief. She is not one of us. She has not been through BUD/S. She has not earned the right to operate alongside this team. She has been through training that you do not have clearance to know about, Senior Chief. And she is here because JSOC believes she has capabilities this mission requires." Capabilities. Vickers let the word hang in the air like something foul. What capabilities exactly does she have that Petty Officer Webb does not? Webb is the finest long-range shooter in the teams. He has 18 confirmed kills. What does she have? Yuki could have answered. She could have told him about the shot in Yemen that officially never happened. The one that ended a high-value target from a distance that most snipers would call impossible. The one that was classified so far above top secret that even the men who authorized it pretended it did not exist. But she said nothing. Words would not convince a man like Vickers. Only results would. Commander Holbrook studied her for a moment, and she saw something in his eyes that might have been respect or might have been curiosity. He turned back to Vickers. "She is on the team, Senior Chief. That is final. Brief her on the mission." Vickers' jaw tightened, but he nodded once. The commander outranked him, and in the teams that still meant something. He gestured toward the maps with barely concealed hostility. 6 weeks ago, a CIA operations officer named David Chun was captured by Taliban forces during a meeting that went wrong. He has information that cannot fall into enemy hands, and he has knowledge that makes him worth more alive than dead. Our job is to bring him home. Yuki moved closer to the maps, studying the terrain. The Spingar Mountains. Elevation ranging from 8 to 12,000 feet. Rocky terrain with minimal vegetation. Long sight lines and countless places for an enemy to hide. The problem is extraction. Chun is being held in an abandoned Soviet mining facility here. Vickers jabbed a finger at the map. 3 kilometers from the nearest viable helicopter landing zone. That is 3 kilometers of open ground with Taliban fighters who know every rock and every shadow. A younger operator spoke up. Petty Officer First Class Marcus Webb. She recognized his face from the intelligence briefings. Call sign Longbow. The team sniper. The one whose position she was apparently threatening just by existing. We have handled worse terrain, Senior Chief. What makes this different? Vickers exchanged a look with Commander Holbrook. The commander nodded, and Vickers continued. Intelligence indicates the Taliban has brought in outside help. A sniper they call the Architect. 11 coalition kills in 3 months. Nobody has ever seen him. Nobody knows where he shoots from. They just know that when he is in the area, people die from distances that should not be possible. The room went quiet. Even Webb, who had been radiating hostility since Yuki walked in, seemed to sober at the mention of that name. Yuki studied the terrain imagery with new eyes. Long valleys, multiple ridge lines, hundreds of positions where a skilled marksman could set up and wait. The Architect would have every advantage. Elevation, concealment, knowledge of the ground. If he was as good as intelligence suggested, this mission had just become significantly more complicated. She became aware that Vickers was watching her, waiting for her to show fear or hesitation. She gave him nothing. Something you want to add, Chief Tanaka? She considered the question, considered the dozen observations already forming in her mind about wind patterns and thermal currents and the way dust moved across certain surfaces. Considered explaining her methodology. Then she decided against it. Not yet, Senior Chief. I'm still observing. Vickers smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Still observing. Well, observe this, Chief. People die when politics puts bodies where they do not belong. If you freeze up out there, or if you make a mistake that costs one of my men, I will personally ensure that your career ends. Am I clear? Crystal clear, Senior Chief. She held his gaze until he looked away first. It was a small victory, but she would take it. In 12 hours, she would need much bigger ones. The team quarters were a row of plywood hooches connected by wooden walkways that creaked with every step. Yuki found her assigned space at the far end away from the others. Whether that was intentional or coincidental, she could not say, but she suspected the former. Her gear had already been delivered and sat in a pile on the thin mattress that would serve as her bed for however long this mission lasted. She began her equipment check with the methodical precision that had been drilled into her years ago. Rifle first. The Macmillan TC-50 was a thing of brutal beauty. 50 caliber. Effective range well beyond what most shooters would ever attempt. She had carried this weapon through 6 deployments, and it had never failed her. She broke it down piece by piece, examining every component with fingers that knew every curve and edge by memory. The firing pin was wrong. She held it up to the light and studied the subtle scoring along the metal surface. Someone had taken a file to it. Not enough to make it obviously damaged, but enough to cause a misfire under stress. Maybe the first shot would work. Maybe the second. But eventually the weakened pin would fail, and when it did, she would be holding a very expensive and very useless piece of metal. Yuki sat very still for a long moment. Her first instinct was anger. Hot and immediate and entirely justified. Someone on this team had sabotaged her weapon. Someone had decided that the risk of her dying was preferable to the risk of her succeeding. She let the anger move through her, and then she let it go. Anger was a luxury she could not afford. Not here. Not now. She reached into her kit bag and retrieved her backup firing pin. She always carried spares. Always. because she had learned long ago that the only person she could truly rely on was herself. She replaced the damage component with quick, efficient movements and resumed her check as if nothing had happened. A knock on the doorframe made her look up. A woman stood in the entrance. Compact build, dark skin, eyes that held both warmth and wariness in equal measure. The medical insignia on her uniform identified her as the team corpsman, Petty Officer Second Class Amara Osei. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. Most people call me Document. You must be the sniper everyone is complaining about. Chief Petty Officer Yuki Tanaka. Most people do not call me anything. Osei laughed. It was a genuine sound full of life in a place that felt stripped of it. I could see why they do not like you. You do not make it easy. I was not aware that being liked was part of my mission parameters. It is not, but it helps. Osei sat down on the footlocker across from Yuki and studied her with open curiosity. I know what it is like, being the one who does not fit. I came to this country from Ghana when I was 16. Joined the Navy because it was the fastest path to citizenship. Spent years being told I did not belong. Still get told it sometimes. Yuki continued her equipment check, but she was listening. She recognized a kindred spirit when she encountered one. The difference is Osei continued that I learned to make them need me. When bullets are flying and blood is pumping, nobody cares where you come from or what you look like. They only care whether you can keep them alive. You need to find your version of that. I have one. I know. I read your file. Or the parts of it that were not blacked out anyway. Osei leaned forward. 3 years with the Naval Special Warfare Development Group. Multiple deployments to locations that do not officially exist. A marksmanship rating that made 2 separate instructors request reassignment because they did not believe the numbers were real. Yuki looked up from her rifle. If you know all that, then why are you here? Because I also read between the lines. Something happened 3 years ago. Something that is not in any file, but left a shadow on everything that came after. You transferred out of DevGru, requested assignments that kept you away from direct action teams. And now suddenly you are here on a mission that specifically requires your skills. Osei paused. I am the team medic chief. It is my job to know when someone is wounded, even when the wound does not show. The silence stretched between them. Yuki could feel the weight of memories pressing against the wall she had built to contain them. A rooftop in Yemen, a target 2,000 meters away. The wind shifting at the wrong moment. The shot going wide by inches that might as well have been miles. And then the return fire that killed the spotter who had trusted her to keep him safe. His name was Thomas Riley. She heard herself say the words before she could stop them. He was 26 years old. He had a daughter he had never met because she was born while we were deployed. And he died because I missed. Osei did not offer empty comfort. Did not tell her it was not her fault or that these things happen in war. She simply nodded with the understanding of someone who had held dying men in her arms and knew that some wounds never fully healed. The mission tomorrow, Osei said quietly. It is dangerous. More dangerous than command is admitting. This architect that Vickers mentioned, intelligence suggests he has been specifically positioned to prevent Shin extraction. He knows we are coming. Then we will have to be better than he expects. Osei smiled. There it is. That is what you need to show them. Not anger. Not defensiveness. Just quiet certainty that you belong here. She stood and moved toward the door, then paused. For what it is worth, Chief, I think you're going to surprise a lot of people tomorrow, including yourself. She left, and Yuki sat alone with her rifle and her memories and the damaged firing pin that she tucked in her pocket. Evidence. Proof of what someone on this team thought of her. She would not report it, would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her complain, but she would remember, and when the moment came, she would show them exactly what she was capable of. The mission briefing that night was tense. Vickers ran through the operational details with professional precision while pointedly ignoring Yuki's presence in the room. Infiltration by helicopter to a landing zone 15 kilometers from the objective. Movement on foot through the mountains under cover of darkness. Breach the mining facility. Secure the asset. Extract to secondary landing zone for pickup. On paper, it was straightforward. In practice, it was a nightmare of variables and unknowns. The terrain was treacherous. The enemy was entrenched. And somewhere in those mountains, the architect was waiting with a rifle and a reputation written in blood. Commander Holbrook pulled Yuki aside after the briefing. His expression was unreadable, but his voice was low enough that only she could hear. I know Vickers has concerns about your presence on this team. He has made those concerns abundantly clear. But I want you to understand something, Chief. You are here because I requested you specifically. Yuki blinked. Sir, 3 months ago, I watched a classified recording of a shot that should have been impossible. A target eliminated from a distance that defied everything I thought I knew about ballistics. The shooter identity was redacted, but the methodology was distinctive. Glass fragment analysis, debris pattern reading, techniques that no one else uses because no one else understands them. Holbrook met her eyes. I know who you are, Chief Tanaka, and I know what you can do. Tomorrow, when the moment comes, I need you to show everyone else. Yes, sir. He nodded once and walked away, leaving her standing in the darkness outside the Tactical Operations Center. The Afghan night was cold and clear. Stars scattered across the sky like bullet holes in black fabric. Somewhere beyond those mountains, David Chun was waiting to be rescued. And somewhere in the darkness, the architect was preparing to stop them. Yuki returned to her hooch and finished her equipment check. Every piece accounted for, every system functional. She was as ready as she would ever be. She was reaching for the light when she noticed it. A small piece of paper tucked beneath her pillow. She unfolded it and read the words scrawled in harsh block letters. Go home before you get someone killed. You do not belong here. She read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in her pocket next to the damaged firing pin. 2 pieces of evidence. 2 reminders of what she was facing. She turned off the light and lay in the darkness, listening to the distant thump of helicopter rotors and the closer sound of her own heartbeat. Tomorrow would answer every question. Tomorrow would prove whether she belonged or whether Vickers was right. But tonight, there was only the waiting and the weight of a dead man name that she carried like a stone against her chest. Thomas Riley, 26 years old, a daughter he never met. She would not fail again. The MH-60 Black Hawk lifted off from Forward Operating Base Chapman at 0300 hours. Yuki sat wedged between equipment cases and ammunition crates, watching the base lights shrink into the darkness below. Across from her, the team conducted final weapons checks with the automatic efficiency of men who had done this 100 times before. No one spoke. The rotor noise made conversation nearly impossible, but even without it, she suspected silence would have prevailed. There was a particular quiet that descended on soldiers before combat. A turning inward, a gathering of focus and will for whatever waited ahead. Vickers sat near the cockpit door. Even in the dim red light of the cabin, she could see his eyes moving across the team. Checking, assessing, counting. He was a hard man, and he had made his hatred of her presence abundantly clear, but she could not deny his competence. He cared about these men. That was why he saw her as a threat. Not because she was a woman, but because she was an unknown variable in an equation where unknowns got people killed. She understood that. She did not forgive it, but she understood it. Webb sat closest to her. The team sniper had not spoken a word to her since the briefing, but she caught him glancing at her rifle case more than once. Professional curiosity, perhaps, or professional jealousy. The Macmillan TAC-50 was a weapon that demanded respect regardless of who carried it. The helicopter banked hard and began its descent. Through the open door, she caught glimpses of the Spingar Mountains rising like black teeth against the star-filled sky. Somewhere in that darkness, David Chun waited in a Soviet-era mining facility, surrounded by men who would kill him the moment they suspected a rescue attempt. And somewhere else, hidden among the rocks and ridges, the architect waited too. They touched down in a valley 15 kilometers from the objective. The team moved off the helicopter with practice speed, spreading out into a defensive perimeter while the Black Hawk lifted off and disappeared into the night. Within seconds, the sound of rotors faded, and they were alone. 8 operators and 1 attached sniper standing in hostile territory with nothing but their training and their weapons between them and whatever the mountains held. Vickers' hand signals were crisp and clear. Column formation. Webb on point. Osei in the middle with the medical kit. Yuki assigned to the rear. She did not argue. Rear guard was where you put the person you trusted least, but it was also where a sniper could observe the entire column and watch for threats from behind. She would make it work. They moved through the darkness in silence. The terrain was brutal. Loose rock and steep inclines that turned every step into a calculated risk. The altitude made breathing harder, and the cold cut through layers of clothing like it was not there. Yuki focused on her footing and her breathing and the constant scan of her surroundings that had become second nature over years of deployments. 2 hours into the movement, she noticed something. A subtle shift in the way dust moved across a rock formation to their left. The wind was coming from the east, but the dust pattern suggested a thermal current rising from below. Warm air from an underground source. A cave perhaps, or a tunnel. She broke formation and moved toward the rocks. Behind her, she heard Vickers hiss a command to halt. Footsteps approached, and then his voice was in her ear, harsh and angry. "What the hell are you doing, Chief?" She did not answer immediately. Instead, she knelt and studied the ground. Faint impressions in the loose soil. Boot prints that did not match American military patterns. Recent, within the last 12 hours. Someone has been here. She kept her voice low. The dust pattern indicates a heat source below ground, possibly a tunnel entrance. And these tracks suggest regular foot traffic. Vickers looked at the ground, then at her, then back at the ground. His expression shifted from anger to reluctant interest. Webb had moved up to join them. He studied Yuki with open skepticism. You got all that from watching dust blow around. Who is she even aiming at? Several of the other operators chuckled at the comment. Yuki ignored them. She had heard worse. She pulled out a small pair of binoculars and scanned the rock formation methodically. There, 20 meters up, a shadow that does not match the natural terrain. Camouflage netting. This is a lookout position. Probably abandoned during our approach, but they will have reported our presence. Vickers grabbed the binoculars and looked for himself. For a long moment he was silent. Then he lowered the glasses and met her eyes. "How did you see that?" "The dust told me where to look." He stared at her like she was speaking a foreign language. Then he turned to the team and began issuing rapid orders. New route. Double time. If the enemy knew they were coming, then speed became more important than stealth. They moved fast through the mountains for the next hour. The pace was punishing, but no one complained. These were SEALs. They had endured worse in training than most soldiers experienced in combat. Yuki kept up without difficulty. Her size was a disadvantage in many things, but mountain movement was not one of them. Less weight meant less energy expended on every climb. During a brief rest halt, Osei appeared at her side and pressed a canteen into her hands. "That thing with the dust. How did you learn to do that?" Yuki drank and considered the question. "My grandfather fought in World War II. The 442nd Infantry Regiment. Japanese-American soldiers who served despite their families being held in internment camps. He used to tell me that survival depended on seeing what others overlooked. He taught me to watch, to really watch. Everything moves in patterns. Wind, water, light, people. Once you learn to read those patterns, the world tells you its secrets." Osei shook her head in amazement. "And the others think you are just guessing. Let them think what they want. Results matter more than opinions." The rest halt ended, and they pressed on. The mining facility was less than 5 kilometers away now. Close enough that every step increased the danger. Close enough that the architect could be watching them right now through a scope, waiting for the perfect moment to announce his presence with a bullet. Yuki found herself scanning the ridgelines with increasing frequency. The terrain here was perfect for a sniper. Hundreds of positions offering clear sight lines and easy concealment. If the architect was half as good as his reputation suggested, he could engage them from ranges that would make return fire nearly impossible. She did not share these thoughts with the team. They knew the risks as well as she did, but she filed away every potential firing position in her memory, building a mental map of where death might be hiding. Dawn was still 2 hours away when they reached the final ridge overlooking the objective. The Soviet mining facility sprawled across the valley below. Concrete buildings stained with decades of neglect. Rusted equipment scattered like the bones of dead machines. And moving among the structures, the unmistakable shapes of armed men. Vickers raised his hand, and the team dropped into concealment positions along the ridge. He pulled out a spotting scope and began counting enemy fighters. Yuki did the same with her binoculars, but her attention was not on the facility. It was on the mountains beyond. Somewhere out there, the architect was waiting. She could feel it, a pressure against her senses like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. He was out there, and he was watching, and when the shooting started, he would make his presence known. Webb crawled up beside Vickers. I count 18 hostiles in and around the main structure. Standard small arms. A few RPGs. Nothing we cannot handle. Vickers nodded, but his expression was troubled. That is what worries me. Chun is supposedly high value. Why is the security so light? Yuki spoke without thinking. Because the security is not down there. It is out here. With us. Both men turned to look at her. She pointed toward a distant ridge barely visible in the darkness. The architect. He is their security. They do not need more men at the facility because anyone who tries to extract Chun has to cross open ground. Ground that he controls. Webb snorted. You cannot possibly know that. She could not explain how she knew. Could not put into words the way the terrain spoke to her. The sight lines. The angles. The perfect positions that seemed almost designed for a long-range shooter. It was instinct built on thousands of hours of observation and analysis. But Webb was right about one thing. She could not prove it. Not yet. Vickers studied her for a long moment. Then he turned back to the facility and raised his radio. Bishop, this is Hammer. We have eyes on objective. 18 hostiles confirmed. Requesting permission to proceed with breach. Commander Holbrook's voice crackled through the radio. Permission granted, Hammer. Execute at your discretion. And Hammer, watch the high ground. Vickers acknowledged and killed the radio. He looked at Yuki one more time with an expression she could not read. Then he turned to his team. Final checks. We move in 10. The facility waited below. David Chun waited inside. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the architect waited too. They were committed now. No turning back. 3 kilometers away on a ridge that did not appear on any coalition mapping, a man known only as the architect settled behind his rifle and watched the American team through a scope worth more than most men earned in a year. He had been in position for 6 hours. He would remain for 6 more if necessary. Patience was not a virtue for him. It was a weapon, the deadliest in his arsenal. He counted 8 figures moving along the ridge overlooking the mining facility. Standard SEAL team composition. Predictable. They thought they were hunters, but they had no idea they were already prey. He shifted his scope slightly and paused on the smallest figure in the group. Different movement patterns. Different positioning. This one was not like the others. Interesting. He made a small notation in the weathered notebook beside him and continued his observation. The Americans would come. They always came. And when they did, he would be ready. Back on the ridge, Yuki felt the weight of unseen eyes like a physical pressure against her skin. She had learned to trust that feeling over years of operating in hostile territory. Someone was watching. Someone with skill enough to remain invisible while maintaining observation. The architect. The team moved down from the ridge in 2 elements. Vickers led the assault group toward the facility main entrance while Webb positioned himself on an outcropping with a clear line of sight to provide overwatch. Yuki was assigned to Webb. Support the primary sniper. Stay out of the way. Do not interfere unless absolutely necessary. She settled into position 3 meters from Webb and began her own observation routine. Not watching the facility. Watching everything else. The way shadows fell across distant rocks. The pattern of dust moving in the pre-dawn air. The 1,000 small details that most people never noticed, but that could mean the difference between life and death. Webb glanced at her with irritation. What are you doing? My job. Your job is to support me. That means watching what I am watching. The facility. The targets. You have the facility covered. Someone needs to watch for threats you cannot see. Webb shook his head. There is again. That mystical nonsense. Dust patterns and glass fragments, and whatever other tricks you use to pretend you have skills you do not actually possess. Yuki did not respond. She had learned long ago that arguing with men, like Webb, accomplished nothing. They would believe what they wanted to believe until reality forced them to reconsider. The silence stretched between them. Below, the assault team was moving into position. Shadows against shadows in the darkness before dawn. Webb spoke again. His voice was different this time. Quieter. Less hostile. I had a sister who wanted to join the teams. She trained for 2 years. Made it further than any woman before her. Washed out in Hell Week. Not because she was not tough enough. Because her body just could not take what the male candidates could take. Different bone density. Different muscle mass. Biology, not willpower. What happened to her? She is a helicopter pilot now. Flies Blackhawks for the 160th. Decorated twice. Webb paused. I am not saying women cannot serve. I am saying there are reasons the teams have standards. Reasons that have nothing to do with prejudice. Yuki considered his words. There was something almost like respect in the way he spoke about his sister. A crack in the wall of hostility he had maintained since her arrival. I am not trying to be a SEAL. I am a sniper. The physics of shooting do not care about bone density or muscle mass. They care about math and patience and the ability to read conditions that other people ignore. Webb was quiet for a moment. Then he surprised her. Show me. What? This dust reading thing you do. Show me what you see. She studied him looking for mockery or trap, but found only genuine curiosity. Perhaps the long hours of shared vigilance had worn down his defenses. Or perhaps he was simply a professional who wanted to understand a technique he did not possess. She pointed toward a rock formation 500 meters to their east. Watch the surface of that flat stone. Tell me what you see. Webb raised his scope and observed. I see rock. Some dust. Nothing unusual. Now watch how the dust moves when the wind shifts. They waited. A gust came from the north and dust skittered across the stone surface. Webb shrugged. Dust blowing in the wind. So what? The dust moved north to south, following the wind. But there is a small area near the left edge where the dust curved, deflected by something that is not visible from this angle. A heat source. Something warm enough to create a microthermal that disrupts the natural wind pattern. Webb looked again. His expression shifted. You think someone is there? I think something is there. Could be a person. Could be equipment. Could be a natural thermal vent. But it is worth knowing about. He lowered his scope and looked at her with new eyes. Where did you learn this? Years of watching. Years of getting it wrong and learning from mistakes. Years of people asking who is she even aiming at while I calculated shots they thought were impossible. She met his gaze. I do not expect you to trust me, Webb. I expect you to let me do my job. If I am wrong, you can tell everyone you knew it all along. If I am right, then maybe we all go home alive. Before he could respond, the radio crackled. Vickers' voice was barely above a whisper. All elements stand by. Breaching in 60 seconds. Webb returned his attention to the facility. Yuki returned hers to the mountains. The feeling of being watched had not diminished. If anything, it had grown stronger. The architect was out there. Close. Closer than anyone realized. The assault began with controlled violence. Flash bangs shattered the pre-dawn quiet, followed by the sharp crack of suppressed weapons. Vickers' team moved through the facility with brutal efficiency. Room by room, building by building. The Taliban fighters never had a chance. They were guards, not soldiers. Men with rifles, but without training. They died quickly and confused, never understanding what was killing them. Webb tracked targets through his scope, providing support fire when needed. 2 shots. 2 kills. Clean professional work. Whatever his feelings about Yuki, he was undeniably skilled at his craft. Yuki watched the mountains, the dust, the shadows, the 1,000 small movements that painted a picture only she could see. And then she saw it. A glint of light where there should be no light. Brief, almost invisible, but unmistakable to someone who knew what to look for. Reflection off glass. A scope. Someone was observing from a position far beyond what should have been possible. 2,000 meters at least. Maybe more. She keyed her radio. Overwatch, this is Ghost Glass. I have a possible spotter. Bearing 0 at 5. Range estimated 2,000 plus meters. Webb scanned in the direction she indicated. I see nothing. The glint came from behind that ridge. Third rock formation from the left. Someone is using the natural terrain to mask their position. Vickers' voice cut through the channel. Ghost Glass Hammer. We have secured the asset. Chun is alive but wounded. Beginning extraction now. Yuki felt her heart rate increase. If the architect was out there and the team was about to move into the open. Overwatch, this is Ghost Glass. Recommend holding position. I have confirmed hostile observation. Static. Then Vickers. Negative Ghost Glass. Asset is critical. We cannot wait. All elements prepare for movement to extraction point. She wanted to argue. Wanted to scream that they were walking into a kill zone. But she was not in command. She was an attachment. An outsider. And Vickers had made it clear from the beginning that her opinions were not welcome. Webb was already packing up his position. He paused and looked at her. You really think someone is out there? I know someone is out there. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he did something unexpected. He handed her a spare radio battery. Take this. If things go bad, you might need it. It was not trust. Not exactly. But it was something. They began moving toward the extraction point. The assault team emerged from the facility with Chun supported between two operators. He was conscious, but barely. Blood stained his clothes, and his face was pale with shock and pain. The extraction point was 3 kilometers away. 3 kilometers of open ground with minimal cover. 3 kilometers where the architect would have every advantage. They made it 500 meters before Yuki saw the movement. Rocks shifting on a distant ridge. Not wind, not animals. Something else. Something that should not have been there. She raised her hand to signal a halt, but it was already too late. The first shot echoed across the mountains like thunder from a clear sky. The shot came from nowhere and everywhere at once. One moment, they were moving across open ground, and the next Petty Officer Kowalski was falling with a hole in his shoulder that had not existed a heartbeat before. The sound reached them a full 3 seconds later. A deep, thunderous crack that rolled across the mountains like the voice of an angry god. Everyone dropped. Training taking over where conscious thought failed. Find cover. Return fire. Protect the wounded. But there was almost no cover on this stretch of ground. Just rocks too small to hide behind and depressions too shallow to offer real protection. Vickers was shouting into the radio. Contact. Contact. Sniper fire from the east. 1 man down. Request immediate air support. The response was not what he wanted to hear. Hammer, this is Overlord. All air assets currently engaged. Earliest available support is 45 minutes. 45 minutes. In a firefight, that was a lifetime. That was forever. Yuki pressed herself against a boulder that barely covered her torso and tried to process what had just happened. The shot had come from extreme range. The 3-second delay between impact and sound meant the shooter was roughly 1,000 meters away. But that did not match what she had seen earlier. The observation position she spotted had been over 2,000 meters out, which meant the architect had moved, or there was more than one shooter. Another shot cracked across the valley. This one struck the ground near Commander Holbrook, sending rock fragments spraying in all directions. The commander rolled into a shallow depression and returned fire with his rifle, but it was pointless. At this range, their weapons were essentially useless. Webb had found a position behind a larger rock formation. He was scanning through his scope, trying to locate the enemy sniper. I cannot find him. There is no muzzle flash. No das signature. Nothing. Yuki forced herself to think past the fear. The architect was too good to give away his position with obvious signs. He would be using a suppressor, shooting from deep within a concealed position, letting the terrain mask his presence. But he could not hide from the dust. She pulled out her binoculars and began scanning the eastern ridgeline, not looking for the shooter, looking for the disturbance his shots would create. Every rifle produced gas when fired. That gas displaced air. Displaced air moved dust. Even the smallest amount. There, 2,300 meters out, a faint swirl of particles rising from behind a rock formation that looked completely natural, completely innocent. Unless you knew what to look for. Webb, I have him. Bearing Zernanetwo. Range 2,300 meters. Behind a split rock formation with the dark stain on the left side. Webb swung his scope to the position. Even if you are right, that is beyond my effective range. The TAC-338 maxes out at 1,800 meters in these conditions. Then we need to move. Get closer. Another shot. This one struck one of the operators helping carry Chun. The man went down screaming, and Chun collapsed with him. Osei was already moving, scrambling across open ground to reach the wounded while bullets kicked up dirt around her. Yuki watched the medic run and felt something twist in her chest. Osei was going to die. She was completely exposed, and the architect would not miss a stationary target working on wounded men, unless someone gave him something else to focus on. Yuki broke cover. She did not think about it, did not calculate the odds. She simply moved, running at an angle away from Osei, away from the wounded, drawing attention, drawing fire. The shot came closer than she expected, close enough that she felt the pressure wave as it passed, close enough that for one terrible moment she thought she had been hit and simply had not felt it yet. But she kept running, kept moving, zigzagging across the broken ground until she reached a cluster of boulders large enough to actually provide protection. She pressed her back against cold stone and tried to control her breathing. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her teeth. But Osei was still alive, still working on the wounded. The architect had tracked Yuki instead of finishing his kills. She had bought them time. Seconds maybe, but in combat seconds were everything. Vickers' voice came over the radio. Strained but controlled. All elements rally on my position. We need to consolidate and find better cover. The team began moving, crawling when they could not run, dragging wounded when they could not crawl. It was chaos and discipline in equal measure. The organized disorder of professionals under fire. Yuki provided what cover she could, not shooting because she could not hit anything at this range, but moving, showing herself briefly, then disappearing, keeping the architect uncertain about where the next target would appear. They reached a rocky outcropping that offered real protection, a natural formation that rose from the ground like a broken wall. Not perfect, but better than anything else available. The team collapsed behind it, gasping and bleeding and alive. Osei was working frantically. Kowalski had taken the round through his shoulder. Serious, but survivable if they could get him to proper medical care. The other operator, Peterson, had been hit in the leg. Arterial bleeding that Osei had managed to control with a tourniquet. And Chun, the asset they had come all this way to rescue, was lying on his back with fresh blood soaking through the bandages that already covered his torso. He took a fragment when Peterson went down. Osei said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes told a different story. Secondary wound to the abdomen. I have controlled the external bleeding, but there is almost certainly internal damage. How long does he have? Vickers asked. If we do not move him in the next 2 hours, he dies. If we try to move him without eliminating that sniper, we all die. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. 2 hours. That was all the time they had. 2 hours to figure out how to kill a ghost who was shooting from ranges that should have been impossible. Webb crawled up beside Vickers. I could try to work closer. Get within range. You would be dead before you covered 100 meters. Vickers shook his head. He has the high ground, and he knows exactly where we are. Anyone who breaks cover is a target. Then what do? No one had an answer. The silence stretched, broken only by the labored breathing of wounded men and the distant whisper of wind across stone. Yuki sat with her back against the rock and thought about Thomas Riley, about the shot she had missed 3 years ago, about the weight of failure that she had carried every day since. She had sworn she would never let that happen again, had promised his memory that she would be better, stronger, more precise, and now here she was, pinned down, helpless, watching men die because she could not reach a target that was just too far away. Her rifle lay across her lap, the Macmillan TAC-50. Effective range 2,000 meters in optimal conditions. But she had made shots beyond that range before. Once, in Yemen. A shot that no one believed was possible until they saw the body. 2,300 meters. The architect was 2,300 meters away. She had done more with less. The question was whether she would have the chance to try. Shin coughed and blood flecked his lips. Osei wiped it away with gentle hands and met Yuki gaze across the narrow space. 2 hours. The medic said quietly. That is all we have. 2 hours to do the impossible. Yuki tightened her grip on her rifle and began to calculate. Commander Holbrook pulled out a satellite phone and began making calls that none of them were supposed to hear. Yuki listened anyway. Years of operating in the shadows had taught her that information was survival and you gathered it wherever you could find it. The commander's voice was low and urgent. I need everything you have on the shooter-designated architect. Current position spin, GAR, mountains grid reference follows. We are pinned, and I have men dying. The response took several minutes. When it came, Holbrook's face went pale in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. He ended the call and sat in silence for a long moment. The team watched him, waiting, knowing that whatever he had learned was bad. His real name is Vasily Morozov, former Spetsnaz, Russian Special Forces sniper who went private after the Soviet collapse. He has worked for the highest bidder across 4 continents for the past 20 years. Confirmed kills number somewhere north of 200. Coalition intelligence has been tracking him for years, but no one has ever gotten close enough to take him out. Webb swore under his breath. Russians. Of course it is Russians. Not Russian government. Holbrook continued. He works for himself now. The Taliban is just his latest client. Word is they paid him $3 million to ensure Chen never leaves these mountains alive. $3 million. Vickers shook his head. For that kind of money, he will not stop until the job is done. There is more. Holbrook looked at each of them in turn. His record includes 6 coalition snipers, men who tried to counter him and failed. The longest confirmed kill in his file is 2,800 meters. In conditions worse than these, the number hung in the air like a curse. 2,800 meters. That was nearly 2 miles. That was beyond what most military snipers would even attempt. And Morozov had done it 6 times against trained professionals. Yuki felt the weight of that information settle into her bones. This was not some Taliban fighter with a stolen rifle. This was a professional, a predator who had spent 2 decades perfecting the art of killing from distances that defied belief. And he was out there right now, watching, waiting, patient as death itself. How did he know we were coming? Vickers demanded. This was a compartmented operation. Need to know only. Holbrook shook his head. Unknown. But the fact that he is here means someone talked. Or someone was bought. Either way, the leak investigation will have to wait. Right now, we need to focus on getting out of here alive. And how exactly do we do that? Webb gestured toward the open ground between their position and the extraction point. We cannot move without getting shot. We cannot call for air support. We cannot wait him out because Chun will be dead in less than 2 hours. We need to eliminate him. Holbrook said simply. With respect, Commander, that is impossible. Webb's voice carried frustration and fear in equal measure. He is shooting from over 2,000 meters. My effective range maxes out at 1,800. Even if I could get a clear shot, the bullet would drop too much to be accurate at that distance. Then we find another way. There is no other way. Webb slammed his fist against the rock. This is what he does. He pins down targets and waits for them to make mistakes. Every move we make, you'll be ready for. Every shot we take, you will answer. He is better than us, better than anyone. The words echoed off the rocks and faded into silence. For a long moment, no one spoke. The truth of Webb's assessment was undeniable. They were outmatched, outgunned, outpositioned. Morozov held every advantage, and he knew it. Yuki stared at the distant ridgeline where she had spotted the dust signature. 2,300 meters. That was the range. Give or take 50 meters depending on conditions. Beyond Webb's capability. Beyond almost anyone's capability. Almost. She thought about Yemen again. About the shot that had ended a terrorist leader from a distance that 3 separate analysts had called impossible. The shot that was classified so deeply that even the men who ordered it pretended it never happened. 2,900 meters. In crosswinds that should have pushed the bullet hopelessly off course. But she had read those winds. had calculated the drift with a precision that bordered on inhuman, had sent a 50 caliber round across nearly 2 miles of empty air and watched it find its target. She could do this. The math said she could do this. But the math had said she could make the shot in Yemen too. And Thomas Riley had still died because the wind shifted at the wrong moment. Because she had been too confident, too certain. Osei appeared at her side. The medic had finished stabilizing the wounded, and now she sat with her back against the same rock watching Yuki with knowing eyes. "You're thinking about it," Osei said quietly. "The shot is too far, is it?" Yuki did not answer. She pulled out her binoculars and began observing the distant ridge again. Not looking for Morozov this time, looking at everything else. The way dust moved across exposed surfaces. The pattern of shadows as the sun continued its climb. The subtle indicators of wind speed and direction that most people never noticed. "What do you see?" Osei asked. "I see a crosswind from the northwest. Approximately 8 to 10 knots at ground level, but stronger at altitude. I see thermal currents rising from the valley floor that will affect bullet trajectory in the middle third of flight. I see atmospheric density that suggests the air is thinner than standard, which means less drag and flatter trajectory." She lowered the binoculars. "I see a shot that is possible. Barely, but possible." "Then why do you look like you have already decided not to take it?" The question cut deeper than Osei probably intended. Yuki closed her eyes and saw Thomas Riley's face. Young, eager, trusting her to keep him safe. "Because the last time I was certain about a shot like this, someone I cared about died. Because confidence is not the same as competence. Because I do not know if I can live with another failure." Osei was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke with the gentle firmness of someone who had held dying men in her arms and learned hard truths about life and death. "Chun has 90 minutes, maybe less. The men around you have families waiting for them to come home. If you do not take this shot, we all die here. Not because you failed, but because you never tried." She paused. "I do not know what happened 3 years ago, but I know that the woman who ran across open ground to draw fire away from me is not a coward. She is not someone who lets fear make her decisions." Yuki opened her eyes. Osei was watching her with an expression that held no judgment, only faith. "Tell me about him," Osei said. "The man you lost." And somehow in the shadow of that rock with death waiting on a distant ridge, Yuki found herself talking. About Thomas. About the rooftop in Yemen. About the wind that shifted at the worst possible moment, and the bullet that went wide by inches that might as well have been miles. About the guilt she had carried every day since. Osei listened without interrupting. When Yuki finished, the medic nodded slowly. "He trusted you. That is why he was there. And if he could speak to you now, what do you think he would say about you hiding behind your guilt while his brothers in arms die around you?" The words hit like a physical blow. Yuki felt something shift inside her. Something that had been locked away for 3 years finally breaking free. She reached for her rifle. On the ridge, Webb had moved into a firing position. He was determined to try despite the impossible range. Yuki watched him settle behind his scope and begin his calculations. The first shot cracked across the valley. Yuki tracked its path through her binoculars. The bullet fell short by nearly 200 meters. Not even close. Webb cursed and adjusted. Second shot. This one went wide. The wind had shifted and he had not accounted for it. Vickers was on the radio demanding updates. Webb was growing more frustrated with each failure. And somewhere on that distant ridge, Morozov was probably smiling, knowing that his prey was desperate, knowing that desperation led to mistakes. Webb fired a third time. The bullet disappeared into the rocks far from its intended target. "That is impossible range," Webb said. His voice was hollow with defeat. "I cannot make that shot. No one can make that shot." Yuki rose from her position and moved toward him. Her rifle was in her hands. Her mind was already calculating wind drift and bullet drop and 1,000 variables that would determine whether she lived or died in the next few minutes. Webb looked up at her with confusion that slowly transformed into understanding. "Let me try," she said. Webb stared at her like she had just suggested they sprout wings and fly to safety. You want to try a shot that I just told you is impossible. I heard what you said. Then you heard me say no one can make that shot. 2,300 meters. Crosswinds. Thermal interference. The variables are too extreme. Yuki knelt beside him and began setting up her rifle. The Macmillan TAC-50 was heavier than Webb's weapon. Larger caliber, designed for exactly this kind of extreme range engagement. She had carried it across 4 continents, and it had never failed her. The question was whether she would fail it. Vickers appeared behind them. His expression was caught somewhere between disbelief and desperate hope. "Chief Tanaka, you actually think you can hit a target at that range?" "I think I have to try. Thinking and doing are different things. If you miss, he will know exactly where you are. He will adjust, and the next shot he takes will be the last thing you ever see. I understand the risks, Senior Chief." "Do you?" Vickers crouched down to her level. His voice lost some of its edge. "I have buried 17 men over the course of my career. Good men. Men who took risks because they believed they could beat the odds. I do not want to add your name to that list." The admission surprised her. For all his hostility, Vickers was no monster. He was a leader who had learned through bitter experience that confidence without capability got people killed. His resistance to her presence had never been about her gender. It had been about his fear of losing another person under his command. "I appreciate that, Senior Chief." She met his eyes without flinching. "But those men you buried, would they want you to give up? Would they want you to let Chun die and watch this team get picked apart because you were afraid of taking a risk?" Vickers held her gaze for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression. Not trust exactly, but something close to it. "What do you need?" "Time. And no one shooting while I observe." He nodded once and moved away to brief the rest of the team. Yuki turned back to her rifle and began the process that had defined her career. The process that no one else understood. The process they mocked as mysticism and guesswork. She called it listening to the world. The first step was stillness. Not just physical stillness, but mental. She let go of the fear and the doubt and the memory of Thomas Riley. Let go of Vickers and Webb and their skepticism. Let go of Chun bleeding out 30 meters away. Let go of everything except the space between her position and the distant ridge where Morozov waited. The second step was observation. Not looking but seeing. She studied the terrain with eyes that had been trained to notice what others ignored. The way dust moved across a flat rock 200 meters out. The pattern of shadows shifting as clouds passed overhead. The subtle shimmer of heat rising from sun-warmed stone. Wind from the northwest. 8 knots at ground level. But the dust pattern suggested it strengthened with altitude. 12 knots at 500 meters. Possibly 15 at 1,000. The bullet would have to fight that wind for nearly 4 seconds. Every fraction of a degree mattered. She shifted her attention to the thermal currents. The valley floor was warming as the sun climbed higher. Heat rising in invisible columns that would push her bullet up during the middle portion of its flight. She tracked the movement of dust particles to map those currents. Found the gaps where the air was more stable. Plotted a trajectory that would thread between the worst of the interference. Atmospheric density. The altitude here was over 8,000 feet. Thinner air meant less drag on the bullet. Flatter trajectory, but it also meant less stability. The round would be more susceptible to wind drift in the final 500 meters. She calculated, adjusted, recalculated. The numbers formed in her mind with the precision of a computer, but guided by instinct that no machine could replicate. 2,300 meters. Bullet flight time approximately 3.4 seconds. Drop compensation required. Wind drift compensation required. Thermal adjustment required. The targeting solution assembled itself piece by piece until she could see the shot as clearly as if she had already taken it. Webb watched her with an expression she could not read. "What are you doing?" "Building a picture." "Of what?" "Of everything the bullet will encounter between here and there. The wind, the thermals, the air density, every variable that will try to push it off course." He was quiet for a moment. "That is not how I was trained. We use ballistic calculators. Rangefinders. Technology. Technology is a tool. It tells you what conditions are right now at your position. It cannot tell you what conditions will be like at 500 meters or 1,000 or 1,500. It cannot account for the way wind shifts between terrain features or how thermal currents change as the sun moves. She glanced at him. You are an excellent marksman, Webb, but you shoot at what you can measure. I shoot at what I can feel. He shook his head, but there was less skepticism in it than before. You sound like my grandfather. He used to say that the old hunters could read the land like a book, that they knew where the animals would be before the animals knew themselves. Maybe he was right. Maybe. Webb paused. For what it is worth, I hope you can make this shot. Not because I want to be wrong about you, because I want to go home. It was the closest thing to support he had offered since she arrived. She accepted it with a small nod and returned to her observation. The minutes stretched. Behind her, she could hear Osei working on the wounded. Chin's breathing had grown more labored. Time was running out, but she could not rush this, could not let urgency compromise precision. The shot would happen when she was ready and not a moment before. She found Morozov's position again, the split rock formation with the dark stain. He was still there, still waiting, patient as a spider in its web. But patience worked both ways. He did not know she was preparing to shoot, did not know that someone on this team had capabilities beyond what he expected. His arrogance would be his undoing. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. A gap in the thermal currents that would appear in approximately 4 minutes as the sun's angle shifted. A brief window where the air between her and the target would be more stable than at any other time. That was her moment. That was when the shot would happen. She looked up from her scope and found Commander Holbrook watching her. How long? He asked. For minutes. Maybe 5. There is a window coming. If I miss it, the next one will not appear for another 20 minutes. Chin does not have 20 minutes. I know. Holbrook studied her face. Whatever he saw there seemed to satisfy him. He turned to the rest of the team. Everyone hold position. No movement. No sound. Get her what she needs. Vickers looked like he wanted to argue, but he held his tongue. Webb settled into position beside her, ready to spot. Even the wounded men seemed to understand that something important was about to happen. The rocks fell silent, except for the whisper of wind and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Yuki pressed her eye to the scope and found her target. 2,300 meters. A ghost named Morozov who had killed over 200 people and thought he was untouchable. She was about to prove him wrong. The window was coming. She could feel it approaching like a wave building offshore. 3 minutes. 2. The thermal currents were shifting. The gap was forming. Her finger found the trigger. Now, it was just a matter of waiting for the world to align. The world narrowed to the space visible through her scope. 2,300 meters of Afghan mountain terrain compressed into a circle of magnified clarity. She could see the split rock formation now, could see the dark stain on its left side that she had used as a reference point, could see the shadow within the shadow where Vasily Morozov waited with the patience of a man who had never lost. 2 minutes until the window opened. Behind her, the team held their breath. She could feel their eyes on her back, their hope and their doubt pressing against her like physical weight. They did not believe she could make this shot. Not really. Webb had tried 3 times with a weapon designed for exactly this kind of engagement and failed. What chance did she have with her unorthodox methods and her dust-reading mysticism? Every chance in the world, if she could keep her hands from shaking. The memory came unbidden. Thomas Riley on that rooftop in Yemen, his voice calm and professional as he called out wind readings and range adjustments. The target visible through her scope. The shot lined up perfectly, and then the wind shifting at the worst possible moment. The bullet going wide. The return fire that came before she could adjust. She had watched him die, had seen the light leave his eyes while she lay frozen with her rifle still pressed to her shoulder. Had carried that moment with her every day since like a stone lodged in her chest. What if it happened again? What if the wind shifted and her bullet went wide and Morozov answered with a shot that killed someone else she was supposed to protect? What if her confidence was just arrogance dressed in calculation? 1 minute 30 seconds. Osei appeared in her peripheral vision. The medic moved quietly and settled into position nearby. She did not speak, did not offer encouragement or advice. She simply sat there, a presence, a reminder that Yuki was not alone. Chun is stable for now, Osei said softly, but his blood pressure is dropping. We need to move him soon. I know. You can do this. 3 words. Simple and direct. Osei said them like facts rather than hopes. Like she had already seen the outcome and was simply reporting what would happen. Yuki felt something loosen in her chest. The memory of Thomas Riley was still there. Would always be there. But it did not have to define her. Did not have to control her. He had trusted her with his life, and she had failed him. The only way to honor that trust was to succeed now. To be the sniper he believed she could be. 1 minute. She settled deeper into her position. The rifle was an extension of her body now. The scope an extension of her eye. She controlled her breathing. Slowed her heartbeat through techniques learned over years of practice. Found the stillness that existed at the center of chaos. The crosshairs rested on the shadow within shadow. She could not see Morozov directly. He was too well concealed for that. But she knew where he was. Could feel his presence like heat from a distant fire. He was there, waiting, confident in his invisibility. He had no idea what was coming. 45 seconds. The thermal currents were shifting. She tracked their movement through the subtle patterns in the dust. The gap was forming exactly where she predicted. A corridor of relatively stable air that would give her bullet the best possible chance of reaching its target. Webb spoke quietly from beside her. Wind steady from the northwest. I am reading 12 knots at my position. It is stronger at altitude. She replied. 15, maybe 16 at the midpoint. It will push the bullet right. I am compensating. How much? Enough. He did not ask for specifics. Would not have understood them if she gave them. Her calculations were not numbers on a ballistic chart. They were feelings translated into adjustments. Instinct refined by thousands of hours of observation until it became something that looked like magic to those who did not understand. 30 seconds. She made her final adjustments. Windage. Elevation. The micro-corrections that would determine whether her bullet found flesh or stone. Every fraction of a degree mattered. Every breath she took could shift the rifle enough to miss by feet at this range. She stopped breathing. The world went silent. The wind still blew, and the wounded still groaned, and somewhere a hawk still cried its hunting call. But she heard none of it. There was only the scope and the target and the bullet waiting in the chamber. 15 seconds. Commander Holbrook's voice came from somewhere behind her. Distant, almost dreamlike. Take the shot when ready, Chief Tanaka. She did not acknowledge. Could not spare the focus. Every particle of her attention was locked on the distant ridge and the man hiding there. 10 seconds. The gap in the thermal currents was almost complete. She could see in the way dust moved across a rock formation 800 meters out. The air was settling, aligning, giving her a path that would exist for only seconds before the currents shifted again. 5 seconds. Her finger tightened on the trigger. Not pulling yet, just taking up the slack, feeling the precise point where pressure became action. Thomas, forgive me if I fail, but I have to try. 3 seconds. The gap opened. The air between her and the target became as stable as it would ever be. The crosshairs held steady on the shadow where death waited. 2 seconds. She thought of Osei, of Webb, of Vickers and Holbrook, and the wounded men bleeding in the rocks behind her, of Chun, who had 90 minutes to live, of Thomas Riley, who had trusted her and paid for that trust with his life. 1 second. The world held its breath. She exhaled slowly, let her heartbeat fade to nothing between one beat and the next, found the perfect moment of stillness that existed at the bottom of every breath. The crosshair settled. Her finger moved. The rifle spoke. The bullet left the barrel at 2,800 feet per second. It crossed the first 100 meters before the sound of the shot finished echoing off the rocks around her. By the time anyone could react, it had already traveled 500 meters and was climbing into the stronger winds at altitude. Yuki watched through her scope, counting, calculating, feeling the bullet's path through space as if she were riding alongside it. 1 second. The round punched through the first wind layer. She saw it drift right exactly as she predicted. The compensation she had dialed and was pulling it back towards center. 2 seconds. Thermal currents grabbed at the bullet as it crossed the valley floor. The rising heat pushed it up, pushed it off course. But the gap she had waited for was holding. The air was stable enough. Barely. 3 seconds. The wind at altitude was fierce now. 16 knots, maybe 17. The bullet was fighting for every meter. Slowing, dropping, drifting. All the physics of long range, shooting, conspiring to push it away from its target. She stopped breathing, stopped thinking, stopped everything except watching. 3.4 seconds. The shadow within the shadow moved. For one terrible instant she thought she had missed. Thought the bullet had gone wide and Morozov was adjusting to return fire. Thought Thomas Riley's ghost was about to claim another victim. Then the movement became a fall. A body tumbling forward out of concealment. A rifle clattering against rock as dead hands released their grip. The architect collapsed into view. A dark shape sprawling across the stones he had used for cover. Still. Silent. Finished. 2,300 meters. 3.4 seconds. One shot. The team erupted behind her. Vickers was shouting something. Webb was staring through his scope with an expression of pure disbelief. Osei was laughing and crying at the same time. Even the wounded men were making noise. Relief and triumph and shock all tangled together in a chorus of raw emotion. Yuki stayed frozen in her shooting position. I still pressed to the scope. Crosshairs still centered on the distant ridge. She watched Morozov's body for any sign of movement, any indication that she had only wounded him, any suggestion that the nightmare was not actually over. Nothing. He did not move, did not breathe, did not reach for the rifle that lay centimeters from his outstretched hand. She had done it. The impossible shot. The one that Webb said no one could make. The one that defied everything conventional marksmanship taught about range and wind and probability. She lowered the rifle slowly. Her hands were trembling now. The adrenaline that had been held at bay by focus and discipline came flooding back. Her whole body shook with the force of it. Someone grabbed her shoulder. Webb. His face was inches from hers, and his eyes were wild with something she had never seen from him before. Pure un filter d'au. How? He demanded. How did you do that? I watched the bullet. I tracked it the whole way. It should have missed by 50 meters. The wind alone should have pushed it completely off target. How? She did not have words to explain. Could not translate what she had done in a language that would make sense to someone who had not spent years learning to see what others overlooked. So she simply shook her head. I listened. That was all she could say. I listened, and the world told me where to aim. Webb stared at her for a long moment. Then he did something that surprised them both. He extended his hand. She took it. His grip was firm, respectful, the handshake of one professional acknowledging another. I was wrong about you, he said. I was wrong about everything. Before she could respond, Vickers' voice cut through the celebration. Save the congratulations. We still have wounded men and an asset who is going to die if we do not move now. Everyone on your feet. We are heading for the extraction point. The words were harsh, but necessary. Morozov was dead, but their mission was not complete. Chen was still bleeding internally. Kowalski and Peterson still needed proper medical care. The extraction point was still 3 kilometers away across terrain that had been deadly minutes ago. But the high ground was clear now. The architect's rifle was silent forever. They could move without fear of being picked off one by one. The team mobilized with renewed energy. Osei supervised the movement of the wounded while Vickers organized the formation. Commander Holbrook fell in a step beside Yuki as they prepared to move out. Chief Tanaka. His voice was quiet enough that only she could hear. What you just did is going to end up in training manuals. They will study that shot for decades. I would rather they did not, sir. I would rather just go home. He nodded with understanding. Some things are better left unexamined. Some accomplishments lose their meaning when you try to analyze them to death. The shot had worked because she had trusted herself, because she had listened to the world and believed what it told her. No manual could teach that. They began moving toward the extraction point. The terrain that had seemed so threatening before now felt almost welcoming. The sun was climbing higher, and the morning light turned the mountains gold and red. Beautiful in a way that seemed impossible given what had happened here. Yuki walked with her rifle across her shoulders and her eyes scanning the ridge lines from habit. The architect was dead, but that did not mean they were safe. This was still hostile territory. There could be other fighters, other threats, other challenges between them and home. She was right to worry. They had covered perhaps a kilometer when Osei called a halt. Chen was deteriorating faster than expected. His blood pressure had dropped again, and his breathing was becoming more labored. The medic worked over him with desperate efficiency, but her expression said everything. He is not going to make it to the extraction point. Osei said, "We need air support now, or we lose him." Vickers grabbed the radio. "Overlord, this is Hammer. We have eliminated the sniper threat and are moving to extraction. Request immediate helicopter support for critical casualty evacuation." Static. Then a voice that carried news nobody wanted to hear. "Hammer, this is Overlord. Be advised we have reports of enemy reinforcements moving toward your position from the south. Estimate 24 fighters approximately 4 kilometers out. Helicopter support is en route, but you need to reach the extraction point before those reinforcements arrive. 24 fighters, 4 kilometers away, moving toward them while they carried wounded men across broken ground." The celebration died as quickly as it had begun. Vickers turned to the team. His face was stone, but his eyes burned with determination. "Double time. Everyone moves. Everyone fights if we have to. We did not come this far to die in sight of home." They started moving again. Faster now, pushing through exhaustion and pain and fear because the alternative was unthinkable. Yuki checked her rifle. 1 shot fired. 19 rounds remaining. She had a feeling she was going to need every single one. They moved through the mountains like ghosts pursued by wolves. The extraction point was less than 2 kilometers away, but every meter felt like a mile. Chen was fading. Kowalski was struggling to keep pace despite his wounded shoulder. Peterson had to be carried on an improvised stretcher that slowed the entire team. Yuki took point. It was not a position anyone assigned her. She simply moved there, and no one objected. Her eyes scanned the terrain ahead, while her mind calculated angles and distances and potential ambush sites. If the enemy reinforcements reached them before the helicopter arrived, she needed to know exactly where to make a stand. The radio crackled with updates. The fighters were closing faster than expected. 3 kilometers now, moving through terrain they knew far better than any American ever could. They would reach the extraction point within minutes of the team if everything went perfectly. Nothing ever went perfectly. Commander Holbrook pushed the pace as hard as he dared. The wounded men groaned with every jarring step, but they did not complain. They understood what was at stake. Everyone did. Vickers fell in a step beside Yuki. His breathing was heavy but controlled. The senior chief had carried more than his share of equipment to lighten the load on the stretcher bearers. "That shot you made," he said between breaths. "I have been doing this for 18 years. I have seen things that would make most people quit the teams on the spot. I have never seen anything like what you did back there. I got lucky." "No." He shook his head firmly. "Luck is when things go right despite your mistakes. What you did was not luck. It was something else entirely. Something I do not have a word for." She did not know how to respond to that. Vickers had been her primary antagonist since the moment she arrived. His hostility had been a constant presence, a weight she carried alongside her rifle and her memories. To hear him speak with something approaching admiration felt surreal. "I owe you an apology," he continued. "I judged you before I knew you. Made assumptions based on experiences that had nothing to do with who you actually are. That was wrong. You were protecting your team. I understand that. Understanding does not make it right." He met her eyes. "When we get back, I'm going to recommend you for a commendation. What you did today saved lives. My men's lives. That means something to me." Before she could respond, a shout came from behind. "Contact south. I see movement." Everyone dropped into defensive positions. Yuki spun and raised her rifle, scanning the ridgeline to their south. There, figures moving between rocks. Still distant, but closing with purpose. "How many?" Vickers demanded. She counted quickly. 8. No 10. More behind them. At least 20 visible, with probably more she could not see. The enemy had split their forces. Sent a fast element ahead to pin them down while the main body caught up. Classic flanking maneuver. Effective against a team burdened with wounded. Extraction point is 800 meters ahead. Holbrook said, "If we can reach it, we can hold until the helicopter arrives. We will never make it carrying the stretcher." Webb replied, "They will be on us in minutes. Then we buy time." Vickers turned to Yuki. "Chief Tanaka, how many rounds do you have left?" 19. "Can you slow them down?" She looked at the approaching fighters. The range was manageable. 500 meters and closing. Well within her effective distance. But there were so many of them, and they were spread out, moving intelligently. Using cover. "I can hurt them," she said, "but I cannot stop them alone." "You will not be alone." Webb moved up beside her. His rifle was already at his shoulder. "I got your right flank." Osei appeared with her sidearm drawn. "I am not leaving my patients, but I can shoot straight." One by one, the other operators took positions. Even Kowalski propped himself against a rock with his good arm supporting his weapon. A thin line of defenders facing an enemy that outnumbered them 3-1. Commander Holbrook looked at his team, and something like pride crossed his face. "All right, we hold here. Make every shot count." The first Taliban fighter broke cover, and Yuki dropped him with a single round. Clean, precise. The body tumbled down the slope and did not move. Webb fired a heartbeat later. Another fighter fell. Then the world exploded into chaos. The enemy had learned caution from watching their sniper die. They did not charge blindly. They moved in short rushes, covering each other, laying down suppressive fire that kicked up rock chips and dust all around the team's position. Yuki worked her rifle with mechanical precision. Acquire target. Calculate lead. Squeeze trigger. Move to next target. She did not think about the men she was killing. Could not afford to. They were threats to be eliminated. Obstacles between her team and survival. 12 rounds. 10. 8. The fighters kept coming. For every one that fell, two more seemed to take their place. They were getting closer. 300 meters. 250. "We cannot hold." Someone shouted. "There are too many." Yuki burned another round. Another fighter dropped. But the man behind him did not even slow down. "Where is that helicopter?" Vickers roared into the radio. The response was barely audible over the gunfire. 2 minutes out, hammer. Hold your position. 2 minutes. An eternity in combat. 2 minutes during which they would run out of ammunition. Run out of cover. Run out of luck. Yuki had 4 rounds left when the sound of rotors cut through the chaos. The Black Hawk came in fast and low. Door gunners opened up with devastating effect. The heavy machine guns tore through the enemy positions like a scythe through wheat. Fighters who had been advancing with confidence suddenly found themselves caught in the open against a weapon they could not match. The tide turned in seconds. The surviving Taliban fighters broke and ran, scattered into the rocks like startled animals. The helicopter circled once, twice, making sure the threat was neutralized. Then it settled into a hover near the extraction point. "Move," Holbrook commanded. "Everyone on that bird now." They ran, carried the wounded, dragged Chin's stretcher across the final 100 meters of Afghan soil. The crew chief was waving them in, screaming at them to hurry. Yuki was the last one aboard. She turned and looked back at the mountains one final time. Somewhere out there, Morozov's body lay cooling in the morning sun. Somewhere out there, the fighters who survived were regrouping and cursing the Americans who had escaped their trap. She climbed into the helicopter, and the crew chief slammed the door behind her. They lifted off. The mountains fell away beneath them. The extraction point shrank to a speck and then vanished entirely. It was over. They were going home. Osei was working on Chun with renewed urgency. The asset was still alive. Barely. But he had a chance now. A real chance. Yuki leaned back against the vibrating hull and closed her eyes. Her hands were still shaking. Her heart was still racing. But underneath the adrenaline, she felt something she had not felt in 3 years. Peace. Thomas Riley's ghost did not answer. But for the first time since Yemen, she thought maybe he would have understood. The flight back to Forward Operating Base Chapman took 43 minutes. Yuki spent most of it watching Osei work on Chun. The medic's hands moved with desperate precision, pushing fluids, monitoring vitals, fighting to keep the asset alive long enough to reach proper surgical facilities. Chun regained consciousness somewhere over the mountain pass. His eyes fluttered open and found Yuki watching him. For a long moment, he simply stared. Then his cracked lips formed words that were barely audible over the rotor noise. "Thank you." She nodded once. It was enough. The helicopter touched down at Chapman, and the medical team was waiting. They swarmed the aircraft before the rotors stopped spinning. Chin was on a gurney and moving toward the surgical tent within seconds. Kowalski and Peterson followed close behind. The wounded would survive. All of them. Because a team that should have died in those mountains had refused to give up. The remaining operators gathered on the tarmac in the harsh afternoon sun. Exhausted, filthy, splattered with blood that was not entirely their own. But alive. Every single one of them alive. Commander Holbrook stood before them. His uniform was torn and his face was streaked with dust, but his bearing was that of a man who had just witnessed something extraordinary. What happened out there today is going to stay classified for a very long time. He said, "The official report will say that we encountered enemy resistance and overcame it through superior tactics and firepower. It will not mention the shot that made everything else possible." He paused and looked directly at Yuki. "But I think you all deserve to know who you were fighting alongside. Chief Petty Officer Yuki Tanaka is not just an attached sniper from Naval Special Warfare Support activity. 3 years ago, she was part of a joint task force operation in Yemen that officially never happened. The target was a high-value individual responsible for the deaths of over 200 coalition personnel. Intelligence placed him in a compound that was considered unreachable by conventional means. The team listened in silence. Even Vickers, who had been so hostile just hours ago, stood at attention with respect etched into his features. Chief Tanaka took a shot that day from 2,900 meters. Holbrook continued, in crosswinds that exceeded 20 knots, through atmospheric conditions that 3 separate ballistic experts said made the shot impossible. The target was eliminated. The mission was successful, and the record for longest confirmed kill in United States military history was set by a woman that most of you had never heard of until yesterday. Webb stepped forward. His expression was complicated. Shame and admiration tangled together in equal measure. 2,900 meters. He said quietly, "That is why you were not impressed by 2,300. You had already done more." Yuki shook her head. "I was terrified. Every second of it. The shot today was harder in some ways. More variables. Higher stakes. People I cared about depending on me. People you cared about." Webb's voice caught slightly. "After how we treated you. After everything I said. You were protecting your team." She repeated what she had told Vickers earlier. "I understood that even when I hated it." Webb extended his hand for the second time that day. But this time he held it there, waiting. "I'm sorry," he said, "for all of it. The comments, the doubt, the question about who you were aiming at. I was wrong, and I'm not too proud to admit it." She took his hand. The handshake was brief, but meaningful. A bridge built across the gulf that had separated them. Osei appeared at the edge of the group. She had finished her immediate work with the wounded, and now she stood watching the exchange with a small smile on her face. "Chun is stable," she announced. "The surgeons say he will make it. Kowalski and Peterson are already complaining about the food, which means they're going to be fine too." A ripple of relief passed through the team. The mission was complete. The asset was secure. The wounded would recover. Against impossible odds, they had succeeded. Vickers cleared his throat. "I believe I owe everyone a drink when we get back stateside." He looked at Yuki. "Chief Tanaka, I would be honored if you joined us." It was an invitation that meant more than the words suggested. An acknowledgement that she was part of the team now. Not an outsider. Not an attachment. One of them. "I would like that, Senior Chief." The group began to disperse. Some heading toward the showers. Others toward food. Everyone moving slowly with the particular exhaustion that came after sustained combat. The adrenaline was fading and the weight of what they had survived was settling in. Yuki remained on the tarmac. She was not ready to move yet, not ready to let go of the moment. Commander Holbrook approached her. His voice was quiet, meant for her alone. I have already submitted my recommendation for your Silver Star. Weeded out their saved 8 lives. Probably more if you count the intelligence Chun is carrying. That deserves recognition. With respect, Commander, I would rather it stayed classified. Like Yemen. He studied her face. Why? Because I did not do it for medals. I did not do it for recognition. I did it because it was the right thing to do, and because I could. She paused. And because I owed a debt to someone who is not here to collect it. Thomas Riley. She nodded, unable to speak his name without feeling the familiar weight of loss. Holbrook was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his pocket and withdrew a worn photograph. The image showed a young man in navy dress whites. Smiling. Confident. Alive. I knew him. Holbrook said. He served under me before he transferred to your unit. He talked about you sometimes. Said you were the best shooter he had ever seen. Said he trusted you completely. Yuki took the photograph with trembling hands. She had never seen this image. Had only the memories she carried and the official file that said nothing about who Thomas Riley really was. He will be proud of you. Holbrook continued. What you did today. The courage it took to try when everyone else had given up. That is exactly what he would have wanted. She could not stop the tears. Did not try to. They fell silently down her cheeks, and she let them come. 3 years of grief and guilt and self-doubt finally finding release. Holbrook stood with her, not speaking, not trying to comfort, just present, a witness to something that needed to happen. When she finally looked up, the sun was beginning to set. The Afghan sky burned orange and red and gold. Beautiful in a way that seemed wrong, given everything this place had taken from so many people. She handed the photograph back. Keep it, Holbrook said. He would have wanted you to have it. She tucked it carefully into her pocket, next to her heart, where Thomas had always been. There was one more thing she needed to do before this day was complete. Yuki found the young Afghan interpreter sitting alone behind the communications tent. He was eating the protein bar she had given him the day before, saving it, rationing it like someone who had learned that food was never guaranteed. He looked up when she approached. Recognition flickered in his eyes, followed by something that might have been hope. She sat down beside him without asking permission. The ground was hard and cold, but she had sat in worse places. What is your name? She asked. Farid. His English was careful, practiced, the words of someone who had worked hard to learn a language that might save his life. How old are you, Farid? 17. He paused. Maybe 18. My mother was not certain of the exact day I was born. 17 years old. Working as an interpreter for American forces in a country where that work could get you killed. Where your own neighbors might turn you in for collaborating with the enemy. Yuki looked at this boy and saw courage that most people would never understand. You helped us today, she said. The information you provided about the patrol routes. It kept us safe during our approach. Farid shrugged, as if risking his life was nothing special. I want to help. America has been good to people like me, given us chances we would never have otherwise. What do you want to do? When this is over, when the war ends? He was quiet for a long moment, thinking about a future that probably seemed impossibly distant. I want to go to school, he finally said. Study medicine, maybe. Help people the way the American doctors helped my sister when she was sick. He looked at her with eyes that held dreams and doubt in equal measure. But that is foolish, probably. People like me do not become doctors. People like you become whatever they decide to become. Yuki reached into her pocket and pulled out a card. It was worn and creased from years of carrying, but the information on it was still legible. This is a contact at the State Department. She handles visa applications for interpreters who have served with American forces. Tell her I sent you. Tell her Chief Tanaka said you deserve a chance. Farid took the card with trembling hands. He stared at it like she had just handed him a winning lottery ticket. Why? He whispered. Why would you help me? You do not even know me. Because someone helped me once when I did not deserve it. Because kindness is not something you earn. It is something you pass along. She stood and brushed the dust from her uniform. And because I have learned that the smallest gestures sometimes matter more than the biggest victories. She left him sitting there, holding the card, holding a future that had not existed 5 minutes ago. The sun had fully set by the time she reached the makeshift memorial that stood at the edge of the base. dog tags and photographs, and unit patches from soldiers who had not made it home. A wall of memory in a place that created too many memories. She found an empty spot and pulled out the photograph Holbrook had given her. Thomas Riley smiled up at her from the image. Young, confident, alive in a way that photographs could never truly capture. She pinned the picture to the memorial and stood back. I did it, Thomas, she said quietly. The shot I could not make in Yemen. I made it today. It does not bring you back. It does not change what happened. But maybe it means something. Maybe it proves that your faith in me was not misplaced. The photograph did not answer. Photographs never did. But somewhere in the silence between heartbeats, she thought she felt something. A presence. An acknowledgement. A farewell that had been waiting 3 years to be spoken. Thank you for believing in me, she whispered, even when I stopped believing in myself. I will not forget. I will never forget. She touched the photograph one final time. Then she turned and walked away. The team was gathering in the recreation tent. Someone had found beer somewhere, and the atmosphere was lighter than it had any right to be given what they had survived. Vickers was telling a story that made everyone laugh. Webb was demonstrating something with his hands that involved increasingly exaggerated gestures. Osei was rolling her eyes at both of them. Yuki stood in the doorway for a moment, watching, remembering how it felt to be on the outside, looking in, remembering the hostility and the doubt and the question that had followed her since she arrived. Who was she even aiming at? She knew the answer now, had always known it really. She was aiming at the impossible, at the targets everyone else said could not be hit, at the future that people like her were not supposed to have. And she was hitting them, one shot at a time. Webb spotted her first. He raised his beer in salute and called out across the tent. Ghost Glass, get in here. Vickers is buying, and he is almost sober enough to still have money. The nickname surprised her. Ghost Glass, her call sign, the one she had earned years ago and rarely heard spoken by anyone outside her immediate unit. Webb was using it now, naturally, like she had always been part of the team. She walked into the tent, and someone pressed a beer in her hand. Osei made room beside her on the bench. Vickers nodded with genuine warmth. Commander Holbrook raised his own drink in silent acknowledgement. These are her people now, not because they had accepted her, but because she had proven herself in the only way that mattered. Through action, through courage, through a shot that would be talked about for decades, even if her name was never attached to it. The night stretched on. Stories were told and retold. Laughter filled spaces that had held tension just hours before. Outside, the Afghan stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to the small human dramas playing out beneath them. Yuki listened more than she spoke. That was her way. Always had been. But when Webb asked her to explain again how she had read the dust patterns, she found herself talking, teaching, sharing knowledge that she had guarded jealously for years. Because that was what teammates did. They made each other better. They filled in each other's weaknesses. They trusted each other with the things that mattered most. The beer was warm and the company was good, and somewhere on a distant ridge, a ghost named Morozov was proving that even the best could fall to someone they never saw coming. If you connected with this story, share your thoughts about what resonated most with you, or tell us about someone you know who was underestimated until they showed what they were truly capable of. Yuki finished her beer and accepted another. The night was young, and she had earned this. Every moment of it. Tomorrow there would be debriefings and reports and the slow grind of military bureaucracy. Tomorrow the real world would intrude with its demands and complications. Tomorrow she would have to figure out what came next. But tonight she was exactly where she belonged, surrounded by warriors who had seen her at her best and accepted her as one of their own. Chief Petty Officer Yuki Tanaka, call sign Ghost Glass, the woman they used to mock, the sniper they would never doubt again. She had come to these mountains to save a life. She had ended up saving 8. And somewhere in the process, she had finally saved herself. The impossible shot had been made. The debt had been paid. And for the first time in 3 years, she could look at the stars without seeing Thomas Riley's face asking why. He was at peace now, and so was she.